everything terrestrially that we use is actually depending on space. Look at SpaceX, one of the largest companies in the world now, and they're really changing everything. What that does is it opens up other portals, if you will, for other businesses and other capabilities.
What would you be hottest about in the new space economy? Is there anything you would be foolish not to look at and try to get in the game on? Welcome back, warriors. This is Katherine Gerald, your host, and today we are diving into one of the most exciting frontiers of our time, the new space economy. Why is this moment in history being called the gold rush of our time? Our guest today, retired Colonel Ram Riojas, is here to explain. With 26 years of distinguished military service, Ram has been a trailblazer in the evolution of air, space, cyber, and special ops. As a founding member of the U.S. Space Force and U.S. Space Command, truly Space Force before Space Force began, Ram has led budgets of up to $64 billion in space and cyber programs, shaping the future of national defense. But he's also walked the entrepreneurial path, founding Delta Defense and scaling it from 0 to 200 team members in just 2.5 years. In this episode, he'll share why space innovation is no longer just for governments, how private capital is driving game changing tech, and why now is the time to double down on the explosive new market. If you're ready to explore the future of aero defense and the booming new space economy, this is the conversation for you. Welcome, Ram.
Well, first of all, thank you, Catherine, for having me on your podcast. It's a pleasure to talk with you and to be able to talk to a lot of these topics, in just a really relaxing setting.
Ram, you've advised defense ministries from Middle East to Asia. How are emerging tech and geopolitical shifts changing the concept of national security?
Some of the main things that have changed in the advising is the need for these countries uh, to get into the modernization and transformation of their defense forces at large. That's one of the big things. I think it was really easy in the last 10, 20, even 30 years for other partners out there to just kind of cut back on defense spending and maybe not modernize their systems. And I don't believe that the world environment, the threat has uh, perhaps increased any more than it was before. But what it has done is it has transformed. And I think they're watching, what's been going on in Ukraine and the war in Israel, and they're seeing all this new technology and looking at their equipment and going, I don't think this is really good enough anymore. And of course, everything today is tied to space. So I think that's where space and cyber, for example, is a key element that ties all of these new systems. No different than at home, right? Anything you buy, an appliance, a watch, your car, it seems like everything is tied to the internet. It's no different with weapon systems. So it's just really interesting. And then the other thing, that I kind of just some quick bullets and notes just to be, as memory joggers that I keep track of typically are just world politics and how some of the strategic environment is changing in the world. But what's interesting about these countries in the Middle East is and other partners in Asia is the way they kind of hedge their future, suppliers and partners. So they will partner and purchase equipment from both what we call, Western blocks, Western bloc, also U.S. and NATO, but also Eastern bloc. So a lot of Eastern European stuff, some Russian, some Chinese, and we just have to deal with it. And it's really interesting. And I think that's a lot of the work I do is help with the interoperability of these systems.
Okay. You've led space and cyber budgets up to 64 billion. Tell me now with Delta Defense Group, how are you positioning yourself for that intersection? You mentioned space, defense, and intelligent, and what's making space so critical for some of these capabilities?
Absolutely. I think what what has transformed was um, how the commercial sector is really now driving space innovation and technology for the sake of commercial use. So the private sector has always been the developer of our space technology, going back to the 50s and 60s, the space race and all that. But their primary customer, almost exclusive customer, was the U.S. government, whether it was NASA, the military, the intelligence community for satellites and all that. And the civil and the civilian market, for the last 25 years or more have really been tied to things like GPS, the global positioning system, that does so many things behind the scenes, mostly with timing for everything we use, whether it's your ATM, pumping gas in your car, banking, healthcare, everything has to use that precise timing signal, and that's how we're able to communicate more effectively. But it was kind of in the background, and no one really thought about it
Well,
too
now
much.
PNT has blown up. Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, and especially for commercial uses, and cyber was right there. So when I spent most of my career in space operations, and for the time that I was building that budget you mentioned at the headquarters of Air Force Space Command, at that time we were also in charge of the cyber mission, and we were standing up the cyber capabilities as we know them today. And since then, they've transferred some of those cyber programs and missions to other services and other agencies. But it was really interesting to see that at the forefront from a military perspective. But a lot of that is now driven by the commercial sector. And I've seen the transformation with how the government uh, purchases or procures or develops systems. Now they're more really focused on the integration and interoperability of these commercial solutions, but the private sector, especially in cybersecurity and commercial, imaging, remote sensing, and satcom like Starlink, et cetera, they are just all going full speed ahead, and it's really great to see that it's all with private capital. It's not tied to the traditional defense acquisition
Why is
process,
that really great to see?
because that's where we get innovation from. And because what happens is that that's a traditional, not just defense but federal government acquisition system is very complex, and has a lot of checks and balances, and it takes a very long time. So the default is to really build a system and operate it for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, in some cases 50 years. We have airplanes that are over 50 years old that we're still operating and maintaining and upgrading and all that. um, and the budget, our federal budget cycles can fluctuate quite a bit. I did 3 assignments at the Pentagon, and there are some years where it's either feast or famine, right? So it's some years we had too much money, and there's no way we could put it on contract and have built developers generate that much hardware, airplanes, tanks, etc. Because we also would run into the issue of you need personnel to operate them as well.
You couldn't hire fast enough to spend the budget down.
Absolutely. So then, in the commercial sector, it's nice that that is not tied to our national budget and things such as continuing resolution when you don't buy a budget and you can't start new programs. So it kind of everything comes to a halt. And then uh, the other major transformation I've seen is in terms of services. So the labor force within the Department of Defense is, I estimate about 25% contracted out to the private sector. So we're different systems engineering and technical assistance type of workers, maintenance.
How has that changed over the years then?
It has increased quite a bit. I'd say it's really gone from perhaps that 5 to 10%. A lot of things were inherently done. A lot of the functions by military members or federal civilian workers. It takes a long time to train them, and then the problem with that is because it takes so long, the system itself was very reluctant to allow a young motivated troop to try something different.
We invested in you, stay put. Well, that's not very motivating.
So not a lot of innovation, right, and stuff like that. And it's just the nature of the beast for that itself. But on the a- again on the private sector, we've seen that, and the other transformation that started with the war in Iraq primarily was the uh, forward deployment of defense contractors. So that became a big, and it's kind of a standard thing now. It doesn't have to be in a war zone anywhere overseas. You have a huge private contractor presence supporting the Department of Defense. It's the same thing with the Department of State. A lot of the business I do is with the Department of State and their contracts all throughout Africa, South America, and Eastern Europe. Um, and they do the same. They employ companies like mine and others to fill that gap of the traditional advising and consulting that used to be done by government workers.
Yeah, tell me about how that's changed. Like, what is the old school advising model? And then now I know the approach is more train, advise, assist. Tell me how that's changed over the years.
No, it's changed significantly. So if we go back to, let's say, the Vietnam era, um, that's when a lot of these functions were starting to mature and be solidified. Things like what they called Military Assistance Command Vietnam, or MACV, which was, military advisors on the ground, special forces primarily, training indigenous forces, trying to support a central government, if you will. And it was mostly counterinsurgency and that kind of thing, focused on those elements. Same thing throughout Central America. That was like the bread and butter of special forces until the war on terror, and then they had to really shift and get into other roles in addition to that role as well. Well, at some point, uh, when NATO started picking up additional missions outside of their traditional charter, like for example, uh, their support in Afghanistan, and in other in Africa, things supporting other countries that are not part of NATO, for example, they really started to perfect the train, advise, assist model, or TAA, and along with the U.S. Army, I think was really leading those efforts, and the Marine Corps. And the next phase, I believe, was and this is in the early 2000s when I started getting involved in Iraq and Afghanistan, mostly on the special operations side and the space operations as well. Was what they called TAA at the point of need. So kind of going forward, going at that tactical level, and wherever they needed that support. But it was still very tactical, perhaps up to the middle ground of the operational level,
Yeah, what do you need? And somebody internally is telling you.
short term planning, kind of the thing. And then I think the latest iteration is what I saw in Saudi Arabia when I was there, supporting the Ministry of Defense through an Army contract, through a U.S. Army contract, was train, advise, assist, and mentor. And I think that the mentor piece, there are two pieces here. I also did this similar work in Afghanistan at the Ministry of Defense in Kabul up until 2020. That was the ministerial level, so advising at the uh, at the highest levels of government across, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Interior, Presidential Palace, that kind of thing, to build doctrine and strategy and so forth. But the latest thing I saw was actually really, I really liked it because it was a mentor piece. So it wasn't just you know, building things for our partners. It was mentoring young troops, young officers, um, and very similar to what we do within our own Department of Defense. So giving them counseling, if you will, of career counseling. It was kind of, I really enjoyed it. I almost felt like I was back in uniform, earlier this year, because I had these young Saudi officers, approach me for, what should I do for my intel career, my space operations? What training do I need? Where do I go to school? Can you help me plan out something? So they're still, they don't have that the deeper level of expertise, if you will, because they haven't had decades of these operations going on the surface. So that's another new thing that's evolved. I think that we're filling that gap, and not just with that partner, but with many other partners, especially like in South America, Peru. They're trying to modernize their forces as well.
All right, you said it before me. The new space economy. That feels like it's on every headline. Having been colonel in the US Air Force and being in Space Force, a founding member before it was Space Force, what does that mean?
And you're right. You see it and you hear it all over the place.
It's a nice buzzword. And I think I'm beginning to think that it's referred to for like anything in space or could go into space.
Absolutely, but more importantly is that the fact that everything terrestrially that we use is actually depending on space. Almost everything we do, the conversation we're having right now, your cell phone, that's your navigation aids. Anytime you look up a map somewhere, everything ties back to either satellite communications, remote sensing, imaging. Uh, One of the latest things is the radar from space. They call it synthetic aperture radar, so you can see at nighttime also, or in the rain. SAR, yeah. And it used to be a very coveted tool exclusive to the military and the intelligence community that gave us a tremendous advantage in the last several decades. And now there are companies that produce it commercially. What I really enjoyed seeing there was, instead of the Defense Department and the intel community resisting that and trying to block them, they're actually embracing it. They are putting them on contract. They're hiring them, giving them work. So they're basically, they're, this goes back to what we mentioned earlier. You have budget cycles where, okay, maybe we can't buy 10 reconnaissance satellites next year, but we can just pay for the service for unique things that we need. And so the space, and you see it growing. Look at SpaceX with Starlink. They have 5,000 satellites on orbit now. It's one of the largest companies in the world now, and they're really changing everything. So they're gonna drive the internet changes to the internet, the service providers, uh, broadband on the go, whether it's on an airplane or a car. Just and then what that does is it opens up other portals, if you will, for other businesses and other capabilities. So it's really twofold. You kind of take advantage of the immediate capability, but then uh, the other avenues that it opens is tremendous in the commerce world. It's almost unlimited, and it can be truly global. And you're no longer tied or tethered to a landline or whatever. And it's so there's a lot to it, and I think it's growing a lot. It's one of the fastest growing sectors for startups, and if you look at some of the, if SpaceX, for example, ever were to go public, you'd see that stock definitely skyrocket.
Okay, you're hot on satcoms. If you were an entrepreneur, which you are, and you successfully made this transition, 0 to 200 personnel in 2.5 years with Delta Defense. But imagine you were just coming out right now. In addition to SATCOM, what would you be hottest about in the new space economy? Is there anything you would totally double down on, or you'd be foolish not to look at and try to get in the game on?
I think what I would do is what we call in the military the operational so what. So okay, you have all these satellites. Who cares? I can't really use a still right now with my cell phone. And that's because it's really hard to communicate directly with a small battery in these things. You can for a short period, but that's still the biggest limitation. I think what I would focus on is partnering with uh, kind of the existing broadband networks out there, fiber networks, cell phone towers, and all that, and basically y- you. Uh, you, you leverage this worldwide coverage and satcom, but then try to get it into the other markets. So whether it's the residential consumer market for television, internet, that kind of thing, cell phones is huge. Um, that would be one of the big areas that and that you see satcom uh, is really what enables the other things, like we talked about SAR imagery, or just the traditional imagery that we're all accustomed with, Google Earth and all that. but you have to push the information. So that's and you so you need that bandwidth through the from Satcom. So I think that would be one of the things I would focus on, and you have to make it seamless. So you don't have to go buy another device. That was one of the challenges with the early satellite phone companies out there, like Iridium and others, was you had to buy a dedicated, very large, phone, and had a short battery life, et cetera. And there was another thing you had to use. So whatever you can do to make it seamless to the user, both with their laptop, their iPad, or their cell phone, your car, whatever. Work focus on that. That would be one of the things I would focus on is the the actual interoperability of leveraging those systems. Not so much building other constellations and all that, but how do you get that to the consumer? Yeah.
Your career has spanned air, space, cyber, and special ops. How do you create a cohesive strategy among all these complex different domains?
Yeah, no, this is a great question, and I think several things, right? It comes with time and exposure to all of those different domains. So spending time in those, it doesn't always happen that way, but for me, when I first came in on active duty in the mid '90s, there were a lot of things happening. So you starting up, I started out doing intelligence, and then they just had started this space operations and um, combined them with nuclear ICBMs, the big missiles, the intercontinental ballistic missiles. And so you had all these opportunities come up, and I always loved learning. I wanted to learn more and get out of your comfort zone. And you could still stay in one track, but you could also uh, go and do other things. So I really enjoyed that and started to learn things. But the things were the exposure to the different domains was one of the elements, for example. And then you had the organizational level. So you could be at a small unit or a squadron level, or up at let's say, the Pentagon or at NATO or something like that. So going in and out of those organizations is what I think really helps you understand uh, within each domain, you know, the domain, it's like whether it's air, space, or cyber, or whichever domain that may be, there's an aspect of operations, there's planning, there's strategy, there's policy, budget, training, education, contracting, all of these things. So that would be like the vertical integration of the domain. And then if you have multiple domains, and that's kind of like the middle part of your career, under getting smart on all of them, and then at the end is when it all kind of makes sense. It's like how they all interconnect.
You got to wait till the end. Nobody wants to hear that.
But you don't. That was the case with me only because the opportunities weren't there
Mhm.
in some cases. But you know, when I think about this problem, one of the things I think about the private sector is to employ something similar to where if you have young motivated workers, you know. You have to groom them and invest in them with both education, force them to get into a different sector, out of their comfort zone, different locations, maybe bring them into the C suite or as an intern or something like that, so they can see uh, what's going on. And I'll tell you, I've seen so many times where that young person, that young worker, young troop, whatever, comes into a room full of these, uh, old, old timers that have been there, done all this stuff, but they may understand today's problem better because that's their environment. They understand the technology, they understand how people think, and so it's symbiotic. So they bring something to that to that higher to the strategic leadership level, but then that gives the strategic leadership level a chance to also groom these. It's really hard in the private sector because if you know better than me this, from your line of business, but it's hard to stay in one company for a long time, much less your career, like you've seen in the past. So it's hard for the company to do that, but the individual can do that. So you can kind of manage your career by doing doing different things and trying to get at different operational levels, organizational levels, and maybe different areas. One of the best things I think that you get, and this is kind of a message out to the private industry for hiring veterans sometimes is you have a different perspective in the global economy. We talked about the space economy, so having people that have lived all around the world, been deployed all around the world, understand the mindset of different partners can be a great tool for a company. And they're comfortable traveling and going to places, and they may be a little bit more in tune with cultural differences and awareness. It's not always just about business. Sometimes it's about the culture and understanding your customer base and what's important to them, et cetera.
hmm And we have seen that a lot more in the recruiting world. Historically, 10 years ago, not everybody got a degree right out of college that's been a veteran. And they'd immediately get booted from a search they were interested in. But over the past, to today, we've seen a lot more clients be more fluid on the education requirements and honor that military time. And I think it's a reaction to the piece you'd mentioned about people moving around and succession being a huge issue now, particularly given the geospatial experience you've had. How do we develop those leaders so that they can think across technology, geopolitical, and operational landscapes?
I think the way to do that is to you almost have to manage their career in a way where they're spending some time learning, get rolling up your sleeves and actually doing the mission, understanding the mission, whatever the mission might be. Right? It could be uh, anything. It could be software development, cybersecurity, or it could be manufacturing.
Regardless of the application, you got it in application.
Yeah, do be at that operational level doing the work, um and trying to get exposure to multiple aspects of your logistics, your supply chain, your budgeting, and all that. So I think it's a process. First, it's just you have to become a technical expert. That was is same in the military. If you're a pilot,
You've gotta own it.
you have to own it. You have to first be the best you can be. You have to be a
Okay,
tech
step
understand
1. Yeah. Expert in your domain.
expert in your domain, right? Step two, understanding what makes your domain work. So strategic planning, budgeting, forecasting, all of those things. What keeps the operation going? When you're a young person, it's just things happen. Oh,
Yeah, but asking that why, and why does this work? Why does it matter?
how can you make it more efficient, all that. So now it goes from understanding your domain, your technical piece of the domain, to perhaps mastering your domain in itself. And I think uh and then after that, definitely getting maybe doing something different. So if you're an engineer, go out and do management, do something, do um just go into a different field. If you're in the automotive field, go into the aerospace, and then go into construction, or do all of those things will make someone a better, more rounded leader, strategist, etc. And then you could just keep growing from there. And the key is, I think, like you said, I mean, sometimes we get too focused, and I see it. It's very frustrating. The reason I started my own company was, I after shortly after retiring from the military and going through, for looking at all the different posts and all this stuff, it was just really difficult to decode what exactly were they looking for, because a lot of times they were looking for very senior um, positions, senior director, vice president, all this stuff. And then some of the requirements were like, make sure you know Python 3.2. It's like, who cares? I mean, yes, that's important, but at that level,
So you were dismayed at the job search process, so you built a 200-person firm.
yeah, so, and that's just one of the things, right? So just matching all of those requirements. But I think how you build those folks is to try to expose them to multiple domains, multiple business areas, sectors, whatever you call them. it will just and education is important. So I hear it all the time. People are like, oh well, everyone has these degrees, so what's the point? I'm like, well, it's even more important because everyone has them. If you don't, you will stand out big time. It may not be a ticket to dominate, but it's a ticket to entry, like you said. But it's important mentally because like if someone gets a graduate degree, for example, now they're thinking more strategically, and that kind of helps them get into other areas. But overall, I think the balance of whatever your technical expertise area is, and then maybe some management, MBA, whatever, or finance, human resources, something complementary, so you're not just super deep in one area. And that's fine. Some people are that. You see that they're really smart, and they're in the lab, and their whole time they do amazing work. But based on your question of how you develop that level, that leader, a corporate leader, etc., that can't be it. You have to have knowledge across the board.
Look beyond just the technical. And speaking of that, before I let you go, with all of the technical expertise you've got and advised on, what remains the most critical human element in national defense?
I think the most human element will always be relationships. There's a lot of sub areas to that, of course. So when I say the most important human element is the relationship, because technical expertise and knowledge and all that is really not enough to have a successful business, to build successful partnerships and a coalition, and to do all that. That's just part of it. So it's required, but not sufficient. So the relationships and the way you build a successful relationship is trust. You have to first establish trust, and that that's going to be the foundation.
How do you do that? I mean, I'm thinking about the new BD entries or even some that just coming out and doing BD for the first time. Like, there's pressure to sell. We got long sales cycles. And how do you quickly establish trust?
I think if and because I did BD as well, and I
When you're
still, I
going to a
mean,
lot of foreign countries with all sorts of cultural differences too, but we're talking US.
U.S. I'll tell you, and I've done it here as well, and I did it a lot when I was still in the government in the military. It was you have to listen to your customer or potential customer to uh, find out what their issue is that they're trying to solve and help them solve that. You don't have to pitch them on some great new capability. Just find out first what they need. I grew up in Chicago. This is Chicago politics. The people would go to the neighborhoods. Hey, what do you need? They take care of that. I need that tree down. I need this, pothole filled. And then guess what? Hey, remember me in November? Yeah, and they would. They'd vote for them.
Use some Chicago politics. I like it.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to offer to solve something first.
Well, and it takes time. And I think that's where, a lot of the frustration can come because there's pressure, to build a pipeline. And it takes, a lot. Not on the first call does anybody close a deal.
No, and as you mentioned, that focus on the U.S., but overseas it's even more critical to build that relationship, and it can take time. And when I went through actually a year of formal training to be a foreign area officer, political military affairs strategies, and to learn that because up until that point, that was in the middle, like almost in the middle of my career. Up until that point, I was just involved in combat operations. So I for the lack of better terms, understood our foreign uh, people in foreign areas through targeting cameras and stuff like that. And now there was a transition, and it was very very eye opening, and it was important for advisors.
That would be a big flip of the script because you're looking at targets one day and the next day it's alliances and relationships.
The same folks you might have been targeting, you are trying to be their friend and partner with them, which could be very dangerous. I had to, hit reverse and do a deeper dive into these countries. And one person gave me some great advice. He goes, read some literature from like the early 1900s or before that, so you understand the country and the culture before it was tainted by World War One, World War Two, all the any literature that might be out there. I'm like, okay, and that really helped, in particular in Afghanistan. But building that relationship, some of our other partners, sometimes struggle with this. Other NATO partners that were there, some were great, but some were too anxious and they didn't want to give it time for the relationship to build. So the common saying, because it was true, was you had to drink a lot of tea, and you had to
Well, that's
be
not really an American business ideal, patience.
no, you had to. And then when I would go visit some of these leaders, um, to try to do some advising and kind of push some of our agenda, if you will, to do the NATO mission. Um, it was it's little, and this is why the interpreters are so. I had a great interpreter that worked with me, and why they're so important because you learn this small things like if you show up and they don't offer you tea right away, they're busy. So they're polite. They will meet with you, but you're going to hurt their relationship because that means that they are actually busy solving other issues.
If you don't get offered tea, you should bounce.
Just say hi and go. And if you have an hour scheduled, sometimes I only had an hour scheduled with a general or a minister, and if they continue to bring the tea, keep on talking.
You can't cut it short. Like, don't overbook.
No, and it's always a good thing. For us, it was always the more time you get, the better. Because but listen to what they need, and it was and I've been able to use that in just business in general in the U.S. or any other place. Just be sensitive to try to help out first before you try to push your product. I mean, I do a lot of that today. I mean, I rarely reach out trying to sell my services. I'm usually always the matchmaker trying to you know, uh, match up a certain company capability with other customers, but it all comes back around, and I think that's the key.
Well, congratulations on your success. Thank you for your service and your leadership.
Thank you, Catherine.